Parker can't be here this evening. So we can sue wherever you want. He's got a technical issue with the chair. All right, commissioners, let's go ahead and get our briefing meeting underway. Thank you all for being with us today. Commissioner Sloan will not be with us for the meeting today. He's got a conflict, and Commissioner Beachflower will be here. She's coming from another commissioner subcommittee meeting now. She'll be here in just a moment. All right, we'll call the meeting to order. Commissioners, we're going to have some discussion about the results of the bond feasibility study that's been conducted over the past weeks and couple of months. We're going to talk about the code enforcement and EVAD ordinance amendments. Have a discussion about life cycle cost and analysis for fleet buildings, and have some discussion about the Tmip project review. If we have time, I also, on our regular meeting agenda this evening, we're going to have a discussion about the county-owned property on Ferry Road. If we have time, if we get through the other agenda items, I would like to review some draft language that in preparation for that meeting tonight, just to kind of walk through that, see if there's any initial feedback. Because I think the staff are hoping we're going to be able to give them some guidance around the future planning for that. So I want to just kind of maybe do an initial preview of that issue. Are there any other items folks would like to have on our agenda for this meeting? Great. Are there any questions about any items on the regular agenda meeting this evening? Terrific. Mr. Vrv has asked that we add for the regular meeting, we do need to add one item to the agenda, which is just a motion to call for a public hearing, not at the meeting tonight, but for the next county commission meeting. So that'll be a public hearing that we need to hold at the May 3rd meeting at 5 p.m. or as soon thereafter as the board can hear the issue in the commission chambers. And this is regarding the Fourth Amendment to the December 16th, 2010 installment financing contract. Mr. Vrv, do you want to just add any commentary on what that item is focused on?
Chairman and board, this is finance director's been working on this for some period of time, have been paying ahead for some debts with a reimbursement resolution. This would be a reimbursement of $85 million, beginning with the 2010 bonds for courthouse work, life safety tower work, et cetera, and also Asheville High, and its new construction for limited obligation bonds of $70 million for more projects at Asheville High, new roofs for several high school buildings, as well as Cell 7 and a few other county projects.
Okay. And so that requires a public hearing, and a public hearing requires a notice of a public hearing. So basically, we're just announcing that this evening.
Right. So
for our
that
subsequent meeting.
Both on briefing and regular meeting on the 3rd. And we need
great
deadline of today to get the notice of public hearing to the clerk to get to the paper.
All right. Thank you, Michael. All right, commissioners, let's move on. And the first item on our agenda is the bond feasibility study results. And Pegeen Hanrahan is here, I believe, to help us with this item. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Chair Newman and members of the County Commission and Ms. Pender. Thank you so much for all of the time you have given us, and especially to Ms. Pender, Ms. Tate, Mr. Vrv. You have an extraordinary staff, and it's been a real pleasure to work with them. So I am with the Trust for Public Land. I work in the southeastern United States, helping primarily cities and counties, but sometimes states, look at funding opportunities for parks, trails, open space, farmland, whatever the local community's priorities are. So I think we're going to bring up the presentation. And some of these slides will look familiar to you, but Ms. Pender asked that we frame it again for those who are just entering the conversation for the first time. So as you all know, back in November, Buncombe County, all of you here, invited the Trust for Public Land to do some feasibility research to look at the opportunities, particularly around funding open space, natural land conservation, farmland, But as you also know, this being such an incredibly beautiful place with so many natural resources and a beautiful downtown and so on, you also are experiencing extraordinary upward pressure on housing costs and the opportunity for everyone to be able to afford to live who wants to live here and who might have historical roots here. So we are funded entirely through grant funding. This has not been funded by Buncombe County. It's primarily funded, just in the interest of full disclosure, by the Merck Family Fund, which has a focus on the Southern Appalachians, specifically around wildlife habitat protection, and also the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. You're familiar with the Duke family here in North Carolina. Doris Duke Charitable Foundation is focused also on land conservation, natural lands, but also on equity and equitable access to communities that may have been left behind to the great outdoors. And so we do work for Doris Duke across the nation. And we co-administer those funds with the Nature Conservancy. The Trust for Public Land, some of you may not have heard of us because we try to keep a somewhat low profile in certain ways, but we were founded in 1972 and we work really across the United States. This is actually a schoolyard project in New York City. So there are people in the Trust for Public Land who work in some of America's biggest cities. As I said, I work just in the southeastern United States, and I tend to work primarily with county government, but also with cities. But as this indicates, we have some very urban projects. We also have very rural, very outdoorsy projects. We do a lot of work around schoolyards, actually, and also water protection. That last picture is an opening of Davis Bailey Park, which is in St. George, South Carolina, that I was excited to be able to help with. So we really draw on whatever the goals and objectives of the community are, which is what we're going to talk about here today in terms of what the goals and objectives of Buncombe County have been. I work primarily on assisting funding at the ballot box. Sometimes I'll work with the state legislature in doing state legislation or something along those lines. But for the most part, the work that I do is only driven by voters and the goals and objectives of voters. I have colleagues across the country that do the same thing. Overall, we have passed together with local government, local communities, and nonprofit organizations, and so on, about 610 ballot measures for parks, land, trails, schoolyards, and related priorities. And I will say, increasingly, we are seeing related priorities that include things like affordable housing. And this program was founded in 1996. We're about to celebrate our 25th anniversary that was postponed due to the pandemic. But speaking of the pandemic, one of the things I wanted to share, we are in some very, very difficult times now. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty and crisis going on in the world. We felt that same way in 2020. Interestingly enough, these types of measures tend to pass in good times and in bad. They pass in red states and in blue. I'm going to share some of that data with you too. In 2020, we thought that we were really going to have a terrible year. Almost every ballot measure that we worked on passed. I think there was one that didn't out of about 50. And, you know, regardless of the political party in power or whatever is going on in the world, the overall success rate over time is about 77%. In North Carolina, the success rate, I think, is 82%. I work primarily in the Southeast. My own success rate over 17 years is 92%. Yay. So we work hard to make sure that we're only working in places that really are, you know, we're following the goals and objectives of the community. So you'll recognize the presidential map. And as I said, I work mostly in the Southeast, so it's very, very red in general. But again, most of the measures that we work on pass. Have colleagues in the Intermountain West in Montana and Wyoming, and they're also very, very conservative. These are nonpartisan issues. They really cut across all of the various divides that we manage to come up with in our nation these days. And we think one of the reasons that these measures pass so successfully is that we really work hard in communities to try to make sure that the timing is right, that the issues that are being addressed is right, that we aren't overreaching in terms of what you are asking your voters to do. We work very hard with your own local attorney. I think Mr. Vrv has spent an inordinate amount of time helping us get the ballot language right to make sure that it's legal and defensible and transparent. So we go through a feasibility study. You all have received a copy of that. That is in public record if anybody would like to receive a copy. I'm sure that If it isn't already on the county website as part of backup for a meeting, it certainly can be. We do a public opinion survey, which I'm going to talk about today. We just completed that on the 12th of April using Impact Research, which is a firm that's done a lot of work here in North Carolina. We make program recommendations, and Ms. Tate and Mr. Frew and I were talking about some of the program recommendations just this morning in terms of assuring accountability, transparency, and that the projects that move forward are the highest priority projects for your community. The ballot language is critically important. It's the one thing that every voter is going to see. There is not a huge amount of leeway in North Carolina, but we've made sure that that ballot language is as close as it can be, reflecting the priorities we think exist here in Buncombe County. There may be a few additional minor tweaks that Michael will work on in between now and that final deadline for the 3rd of May. And then not with the county, entirely privately funded with local nonprofit and neighborhood groups, you know, any two who come together, we are happy to work with to do a campaign. And it's the same kind of campaign for other issues. It's legal for nonprofits to work on them, but we do follow pretty strict guidelines that the county does not get involved in advocacy, only in providing straight up and down information to your residents. This is probably a little hard to read, but going into something like this, there are a few key elements that must be in place in order for a measure like this to succeed. One is a demonstrated need. You obviously have enormous needs both in affordable housing and also in the concerns that people have over loss of natural land, farmland, open space, and providing access to the great outdoors here in this beautiful place. The elected leadership has to be on board. There are many places I've worked where the community might be ready, but the elected leadership does not have this as a current priority because of all of the other many priorities that local government has to take on. But this is entirely a policy decision for you, the Board of County Commissioners. And then community engagement and support. If there is not leadership that comes forward from among the community to go and talk at those luncheons, the Kiwanis clubs and the church picnics and the neighborhood association meetings and so on, it likely won't go forward. And so those three ingredients really need to come together. And everything I've seen so far here indicates that they have come together for this fall. So the feasibility research that I mentioned, and I covered a lot of this at the last time I was with you all, but goes just over the basic demographics and financial circumstances, your current budgetary allocations for these issues, the political profile of the community, things like voter turnout and voter registration, the election history, including in other communities. We looked at Wake County, for example, has done both affordable housing and open space, the election requirements, the ballot language requirements, and then some of the best practices that we see again across the country. So the mechanism that seems most appropriate here is use of bonds that are backed by the property tax. Bond is just a word that means long-term lending instrument. It's like a mortgage for a residence is what a bond is for a government. And so in the case of Buncombe County, we looked at what the average cost to the average annual cost to the medium home would be for the two different priorities. I want to share that this is an absolute maximum, and I know that Ms. Pender has emphasized that the tax-based growth that has been going on and the population growth are such that you may be able to do this without substantial increase. I'll allow her to speak to that. But this is a worst-case scenario. This anticipates that the bonds would be issued all at once at the very beginning, which doesn't typically happen because they cannot all be spent responsibly in such a short period of time, and there are rules and regulations about that. But it assumes all of the money, all of the bonds issued at once. It assumes no tax-based growth, which you know is not so. It does assume a 4% interest rate, which I had been saying is higher than normal, but it's obviously interest rates have been creeping up for everyone. So what this leads to is that if we were to look at a $30 million bond for for conservation and open space and farmland, and a $40 million bond for affordable housing, The $30 million bond, the max anticipated increase to the average annual home is $14 a year. And for the affordable housing at $40 million, it would be $18 a year. So together, it's still a very modest cost in the low 30s. So these are the recommendations that we have. And again, there are some details that obviously will need to be worked out that sort of balance the administration of the program, the time that your staff has available, the extent to which the local communities, the advocacy communities wish to weigh in on priorities and so on. But again, the funding source we recommend is bonds. We're recommending $30 million for conservation and $40 million for affordable housing. Those actually came from Buncombe County, from your own priorities, but those are the numbers that we tested in the polling. I'll share that I just as an outsider, asked the question, well, why are those two numbers different? And it was really clear that the primary reason is that obviously affordable housing needs to be close to where people already live, where schools are, where businesses are, where people go to work, and that's obviously more costly to do that. And you're obviously doing improvements to existing homes and so on. And so that's why those two numbers are different. We recommend a November 2022 election. I have a slide on why November elections are great. We do recommend community oversight and also annual independent audits. You all know that Buncombe County already does annual independent audits, but not everyone knows that. And so we recommend making it very clear and very transparent that you are committed to ensuring that these funds are stewarded in a way that people can feel good about them and know that they're going to the purposes desired and that they're being run efficiently and effectively. I mentioned the November election turnout. The peaks of this graph are all presidential elections, and then the next lower are the gubernatorial elections. Higher turnout elections are good, obviously, because more people get to weigh in on the issue, but they're also good because those lower turnout voters tend to be supportive of these priorities. And then we also have your breakdown in terms of party registration and so on listed here. So now I'm going to transition into sharing just some of the top data from the polling firm Impact Research. As I said, this was done just last week between the 7th and 12th, let me move on, of April, so just within 10 days of where we are today. We called and or texted, but primarily called 400 voters who completed the survey. So obviously they probably put in 800 calls in order to get 400 completed surveys or more. These were live calls. They were live callers, and some were text to internet, but those, the way they do that, you can be sure of who the specific voter is, so you can capture their demographic data and so on. The margin of error for this is 4.9%, so the numbers could be 5% higher or 5% lower. Our experience, lots of people have opinions about polling, but for the 600 measures plus that we've worked on, we've probably conducted over 400, maybe over 500 polls. I almost never work on a ballot measure that we haven't polled. The data for issues does not jump around as much as the data for candidates. Just so you know, people tend to know how they feel about issues, what their priorities are, fiscal concerns and those kinds of things. I'm not going to say, it's always a snapshot in time. So I'm not going to say that this data couldn't change if something terrible happens in between now and November. But for the most part, we find that the results of the election day typically line up pretty well to the polling. So the first question and the most important question that we ask is really just what we call a clean read of the ballot language. This is before we really even start talking very much about, pros, cons, costs, anything else. And this is kind of mimicking how people respond when they walk into the ballot box and perhaps read it for the first time. But we ask it several other times throughout the questionnaire in order to see how much it jumps around. But I'm going to go ahead and read it because this is very tiny type. I apologize for that, just trying to get it all onto one slide. So this was the language, and this is the exact language that Mr. Vrv approved. As I said, there may be some minor tweaks in between now and your final adoption if you choose to move forward to adoption, but this is substantially how the language will read. So they just start with an intro. I'd like to get your opinion on some ballot questions that may be decided by voters in Buncombe County this November. Here's the first one. Open space bonds proposal. Shall the order authorizing $30 million of bonds plus interest to pay the capital costs of acquisition and improvement of land or interest therein for conservation and protection of natural resources and preservation of farmland, including but not limited to the development of greenways and trails for recreation purposes, and providing that additional taxes may be levied in an amount sufficient to pay the principal of and interest on the bonds be approved. If the election were held today, would you vote yes in favor of this proposal or no to oppose it? Now, it's not uncommon. I sit and listen to some of these questionnaires sometimes. It's not uncommon for people to say, can you read that again? What does that mean? You know, this is very legalese language. Believe me, Michael has gone over it 100 times. Most of this is required by the state of North Carolina. So I don't love this language, but I do love complying with the law. So there we go. So 51% said yes, they strongly support this. 14% said yes, but not so strongly. 6% said, I don't know, but then when pushed, they said, I would lean yes. So that's 71% total yes, and it ends up being 24% total no. So that's a really strong result. In general, as I shared with some of you before, we typically look for, we typically don't recommend going forward if we're at 55% or lower. I have certainly worked in cities and counties that did go forward when they were 55% lower. I'll share because we speak about this one a lot at National Recreation and Parks Association, for example. I think I've done that 3 times with the former Parks Director of Doral, Florida. Doral pulled it like 53%, and I was like, and it was a $150 million bond. I was like, oh my goodness, maybe we need to, wait, do this later. They said, go big or go home. You just got to know Doral. That's the way they are. And it passed with like 51%. So, but they ran a really strong campaign there in the city of Doral. So we're looking for about 55. This one polled at 71. So here's the affordable housing question. Again, I'm going to read that to you since the type is very, very small. This is titled Housing Bonds Proposal. Shall the order authorizing $40 million of bonds plus interest to pay the capital costs of housing for the benefit of persons of low or moderate income, including construction of related infrastructure improvements and the acquisition of related land and rights of way, and providing that additional taxes may be levied in an amount sufficient to pay the principal of and interest on the bonds be approved. If the election were held today, would you vote yes in favor of this proposal or no to oppose it? So in this case, 39% said yes strongly, 15% said yes not so strongly, 9% said undecided but lean yes. So that's 63% total yes, and the total no was 32%. So again, that's a really great margin between the yeses and the nos, and it's also well above what we consider a threshold of viability. As I said, we laid out both pros and cons. We shared the costs. The numbers bounced around a little, but for the most part, this is the most important number that we really look at, and we're at 71 for open space bonds and 63 for housing bonds. We did actually delve down into the different uses of the funds, and I just want to go over this because I thought it was interesting data. All of these uses in both cases polled very well. The number at the very end is the total either strongly support or somewhat support. We really sort of focus on the blue, which is the strongly support. So protection of natural resources was the highest on the open space bonds at 69%, said they strongly support protection of natural resources. Protecting local wildlife was at 65. Preservation of farmland was at 62. Helping combat climate change was at 59. I asked that not because it was likely to be a focus or in the language, but because that is a priority of our funders. So I shared that just so you know. Acquisition and improvement of land or interest for conservation, which is specifically out of the ballot language, was at 57. Protection of open space was at 57. And acquiring and developing greenways and trails for recreation purposes was at 52. Now that's the strongly support. The total support is at the end. So it's as high as 89 for protection of natural resources, but still at 76 for acquiring and developing greenways and trails for recreational purposes. So moving to the housing, and we didn't poll as many uses as I've shared with you all before. Although I served as an elected official and as a county staffer, I'm familiar with affordable housing, but I would not put myself forward as an expert on it. And so I don't have as many grand ways of talking about affordable housing, I will confess to you. So we really stuck with just what was in the ballot language. So we polled housing for the benefit of persons of low or moderate income. That was the strongest at 5474 total. Construction of infrastructure improvements related to affordable housing, 48, and then 72 total. And then acquiring local land and rights of way to help build affordable housing was 38 and 63. So again, strong results overall. Strongest was, again, focusing on the people, the housing for the benefit of persons of low or moderate income. So just so you know, I know that Kevin and Bo, the pollsters, Kevin Atkins and Bo Salant, who worked on this, would be more than happy if you want to, ask some questions. I have, more than happy to delve into this data more. I just wanted to give you a brief overview. Again, if this does move to the ballot, we will certainly work with local advocates for both housing and open space to try to get the word out to citizens. These are some examples of campaign literature actually from South Carolina in both cases. One is from Beaufort County and one is from Dorchester County. Both of those passed. And actually, I'll point out Dorchester, I worked on that one in 2019. That was both parks and libraries, but it was two separate bonds. So they marketed those together, vote yes for parks, vote yes for libraries. We polled them both, just like we did here. And both passed almost exactly at what the polling said. The parks passed at 67%. And that was, weirdly enough, not on-cycle election. It was a municipal election date. So that was really good. If it had been on a big November election, I'm sure it would have been higher. And we just do the same kind of things. I mean, there'll be mail, there'll be paid social media, there'll be, events, yard signs, speakers bureau, you name it. So that's what I had to present to y'all today. I am happy to take any questions you have and look forward to the next steps.
All right, Begin, thank you so much. Great presentation. Commissioners, any questions? And or is there additional information about about next steps and sort of the timeline for if the commission wants to proceed with further consideration of this? What are the necessary timelines for that process?
I was looking at, I believe Michael actually has the list of the next steps. So we'll be coming back on May 3rd for the actual order for you to direct staff to move forward or not. We will have to go to LGC, so the process needs to start on May the 3rd. Needs to make the November election. If
Okay.
you have any specific dates that you want to share for?
I did not get the full timeline in place, but what we had to do is kick off with the steps for a bond order.
Mm-hmm.
And what that would be is for May 3rd to have that presentation to the board. What we'll do is prearrange to have a public notice into the newspaper of our intent to file with the local government commission for this bond approval. That process would happen in June. This would go along, there'd be a public hearing on the actual bond order language before this board sometime before budget in early June as well. And then the bond language would have to be delivered to the Board of Elections to make sure it's in place and ready to go through that process for the State Board of Elections and local Board of Elections by the first Friday in August.
Okay.
And then it'd be on the ballot there that first Tuesday in November.
Okay, great. Commissioners, other questions? So this will be on the agenda for our next meeting to talk further about and to give an indication of let's take next steps or not. Other questions, commissioners?
I don't think I have any specific questions, but I'm very excited about this opportunity. It's something that I've heard people speak to over the past 3 years, both of these issues and how important they are to people here. I think they want definitely that I hear them talking about affordable housing for working folks and families. And they also very much deeply care about this place. And they want us to conserve our mountains and water resources and farmland. And I think the results that you shared with us today very much relate to what we're seeing from our comp plan feedback, and especially around that they value the natural resources and the beauty. And I think about if we want Buncombe County to thrive, not just now for us, but for our future generations, we need to definitely be looking at doing both of these things to make this a place not only for us now, but for our children, our grandchildren. And so I'm very excited about this opportunity for us to move forward with this.
Great. Thanks, Terry.
I would echo a lot of that. You said it really well, Terry. I wonder if, as we move forward in the discussion, we could have an overlay of the affordable housing strategies and just kind of a refresher on what 40 million could accomplish against what timeline. I think that's just sort of one piece I'd like to really get my head around, because I think we're trying to be so particularly strategic around how we invest that money, and hopefully are able to draw other funding sources into the mix. And just as we prepare sort of for final baking of this, I guess you'd say, would like to just drill down on that, and also just kind of think through with one more pass if 40 million and 30 million reflects kind of the best ratio there. But very excited as we move forward, and thank you to the team who's worked on the polling and research.
I just want to add one quick thing to Commissioner Beach-Farrar's comments, which is something she said triggered a thought, which is that it's very common for local governments that pass a local funding source to then use those local dollars to bring down state and federal dollars in both of these areas. But oftentimes, state and federal grant sources do require some local match. And so not having that, dedicated funding source at the local level means that those opportunities sometimes go by. So that is something certainly, and I really like the idea of being able to clearly articulate all of the work that y'all have already done in these areas. We spoke this morning about the fact you already have several community advisory groups that do oversight on similar issues, and so maybe there's an economy of scale to be grabbed there. But it is great to be able to articulate to people, these are the protections in place for transparency and for accountability. These are the plans that we have so that people can be aware of what will actually be done with the funds.
I think it's a great suggestion, Jasmine, and I think we could definitely be prepared as we talk about it again to kind of bring back up some of the numbers around the affordable housing goals that the commission approved earlier this year, and some of the budget forecasts for the resources needed to achieve those goals between now and 2030. And as I think you guys will recall when we talked about that, I think the affordable housing goals and the workforce housing goals, it's such an important issue. Like, my view would be, even if we weren't doing a bond, we should be really committed to those goals. And there's theoretically a way you could get there. It would require, like, in every annual budget, really making it a top priority and things like that. So I wouldn't say it's not theoretically possible to pursue these goals, but I certainly think that if the voters support a bond referendum such as this, then it makes the prospects for us meeting or hopefully exceeding those goals, the likelihood of success is just much stronger. So, other questions? All right, well, Pegeen, to you and everybody at Trust for Public Land, I think, the commission's just really appreciates your work on this. I remember Terry and I I can't remember who met who first, but we heard from Trust for Public Land and their interest in working with communities in the Southeast and especially in the Southern Appalachian region around that are interested in working on conservation projects, was, of course, their primary mission and starting point. And let us know that they had some funding to work on feasibility studies, and would that be of interest to Buncombe County? And I know that when we heard that, we were like, wow, that's, we're just starting this comprehensive plan. We're hearing from the community that is one of the very top priorities, which is no surprise because we hear it from our constituents all the time. And so the ability to go out and do some of this feasibility at no cost to the county taxpayer, so we can really look at what the different options are and potentially provide some of these options to the voters of the county to consider, is really exciting. So we really appreciate Trust for Public Land coming in and helping to do that and to do some of this initial evaluation for us. It's great work.
Thank you. You've been a real pleasure to work with as well.
All right. Well, we look forward to talking further at our next meeting. Okay. The next item on our agenda is the code enforcement and EVAD ordinance amendments, and Brandon Freeman's going to help us out with this item.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I believe I have a PowerPoint, and I sent Max 3 versions of it, and I apologize. He's back there. It's coming up. There it is. All right. So this is just keeping our ordinances in line with state law. In August of last year, the state passed a law that decriminalized certain prohibited criminal penalties for certain local government ordinance violation, and removed a general principle that it used to be if a local government had an ordinance on the books and it was violated, if the ordinance didn't say anything different, it was considered to be a misdemeanor. That's no longer the case. So that was the big thrust of this law. What we did is change our ordinance to specify which penalties would still carry misdemeanors, and more importantly, we deleted all ordinances that can no longer be enforced with a criminal penalty. By and large, that was land use law violations, so we've taken those out of our ordinance. So I said by and large they were land use law violations, so it was planning development, regulations of licenses and business trades. I don't think we had any of those that were being enforced with a criminal penalty. Stream clearing programs. It was really mostly land use stuff for us. I think as an action item, you won't be able to adopt this at the first meeting where you look at it, so we'll have it on 2 different agendas. And so what'll be in front of you at, I believe, your next meeting or whatever meeting you'd like to have it on the agenda, are 30 revisions to the ordinance that we've worked with staff to make. Nothing really new here. This would just be to maintain the status quo and to bring us in line with state law. You've heard Mr. Pennington and other staff members talk about the work going on with the comp plan. I think that a more holistic view of what code enforcement and criminal enforcement may look like in the context of our ordinance would be a better conversation to have after we get through with the comp plan. But this is just to make sure that we are in line with state law. It's always the exciting stuff when I'm here. One more thing that didn't make it onto the PowerPoint was a technical correction to our voluntary ag districts to bring that in line with state law, just to change to the definition. It's really not something that I explain as well as probably Jennifer Harrison could, but I can do my best. The thrust of that is the same. It's just to bring the definition in line with a change to state law.
What's the definition of an infraction penalty?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, could you just cover once again, what's the definition of an infraction penalty?
An infraction would be something that is punishable by a fine in criminal court, but it would not be arrestable.
Okay. Thank you.
Plan is to have this on the agenda for the next meeting. Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you.
All right. Next item, life cycle cost analysis for fleet building. And Scott Metcalf and Jeremiah Leroy are here to help us out with this item. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Newman, Commissioners. Good to be here. Back in September of 2020, which sometimes feels like a lifetime ago, we as a board adopted a resolution around new construction and major renovation on county facilities. So our goal is to meet the LEED Gold standard for all new construction going forward. And in order to provide some flexibility in that policy, in the decision-making process, part of what was built into the policy was this idea around life cycle cost analysis, so that we get a sense for what something costs today, but also what is the long-term costs of some of the decisions we make today during the construction process. And the fleet facility is really the first opportunity we've had to take this policy and run with it. And so what we have for you today really is just a short presentation from our architecture and engineering firm, and to show you some of the options that are available, as well as obviously to allow for some board discussion and some feedback on those options. So we've got Scott Metcalf is our project manager in general services, and we've got our architecture and engineering firm, CP&L, are going to give you a brief presentation, and we're here for any questions you have.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name's Todd Dalton. I'm an architect with CPL. What you see here is the site plan for the new fleet facility. We've moved this building, I think, 3 times off the landfill, where we were wrestling with subsurface issues, grade issues, and we found the site adjacent to the firing range where we aren't wrestling with those things, and it could start to look at passive strategies for what we could do to optimize building performance, optimize the program, and optimize the operational flow of vehicles. So what you see here is really sort of the scenario that gave us the best balance of those things, with this L-shaped configuration that allowed for the building and the garage to really kind of tuck into the existing topography there. Similarly, with the building massing, we also looked at strategies to optimize the surface for the renewable energy array on top of the roof. So we went through various building options, looking for what gave us the best balance of structural cost, building performance, and efficiency, while also allowing for future growth. And so where we landed here was with option A, that kind of gave us the best balances of all those things, with a really large high roof that was unobstructed for the solar array, but also allowed for the future second floor mezzanine in the storage area.
So my name is Mike Penna. I'm the engineering lead on the job. Thank you for having us. I'm going to describe to you guys some of the systems that we've looked at and kind of the thought process, where we are, and some of the decisions that are still to be made, I guess. So you can see the layout of the building here. We've essentially got it broken up into 3 different HVAC system types based off of the needs of the facility. The green area kind of is primarily office area. The purple area there, that's more of a storage area. And then this orange area is the garage area. So as far as conditioning, the green will be fully heated, ventilated, and cooled. The storage is the same, and the orange garage area, at this point, we're looking at obviously ventilating it and heating it, not putting air conditioning in there, but coming up with some fans to circulate the air for the occupants. As far as the systems go, this green area that we've got is we're looking at a VRF system with energy recovery ventilators. Basically, it's a fully electrified system. It's very efficient. It's got great heating and cooling performance. Like I said, there's an energy recovery ventilator that pulls energy from the exhaust air and puts it into the supply air in heating, and vice versa in cooling. It's very efficient, fully electrified. In the purple area, really the choices, when I move on to the forward slides, the choices that we're talking about are really within the purple area and the orange area here. The purple area, the storage area, we're looking at ground-mounted air handler with DX cooling and either natural gas heat or electric resistance heat. And that heat would be used, so in normal operation, when we're not in very low ambient conditions, the system would actually be fully electrified using the heat pump in the unit. But when we get to low ambient temperatures, say below 20 degrees or so, or if the electric resistance heat or natural gas heat failed, then, if the heat pump failed, then we'd go to our natural gas or electric resistance heat. This orange area, basically we're looking at either natural gas heat or electric resistance heat. And that would be inside of a pad-mounted, ground-mounted air handler, as well as some overhead infrared radiant that would either be natural gas or electric. This slide describes the VRV system. If you're not familiar with it, it's all based on refrigerant, and as opposed to electric resistance heat, where you're actually creating heat, which takes a lot of energy. You're actually just moving heat from one place to the other, moving it from outside to inside. It's very efficient. Kind of regardless of your sustainability or energy efficiency goals, it's a great system, super efficient. It's a great fit for the office area. So at least now, any of the options we discussed, this is included in any of those options. Okay, into our life cycle cost analysis. I've got a couple slides on this. This first one has a lot of the details. It's got the detailed numbers. Our next slide will kind of tell the story. It's a little bit easier to see visually. But essentially what we've got here under estimated costs, these 4 columns are 4 options that we evaluated. So the first option is utilizing natural gas heat in the storage room air handler and the garage bay air handler. The second option uses those same systems, but we're adding photovoltaic arrays on the roof of the facility that would cover approximately 90% of the electrical load in the facility. So same systems in the first and second columns, but the second column, the difference is the addition of solar. The third option is full electrification. So it gets rid of any of the natural gas heat in the air handlers, which basically, like I said, it's the 2 air handlers and then infrared radiant heat in the garage area. Same amount of solar, just going full electrification. The fourth column we've got there, that's also full electrification, but we said, okay, how much additional solar would we need to kind of take up that difference in electrical demand? So those are the 4 options that we're talking about. On the left side here, the items, you can see basically from option to option, the parts of the building or the cost of the building, whether they're upfront or in the life cycle down the road, the parts that vary. So you can see we've got gas distribution. That's actually providing the gas service to the facility. The electrical service, the actual cost of the HVAC equipment that would be either natural gas or electric. The solar equipment, the maintenance costs of any of that solar equipment. The annual utility energy costs. And that's it. So if you total the cost of all of these items over 20 years, which is about the life cycle of the solar system, you get in this blue row at the bottom, that's the total cost in the 20-year life cycle of the equipment. You can see moving from left to right, starting with natural gas and no solar, it goes up a little bit with each option in terms of the total life cycle. So we can come back to this if you want to get into any of the details, but I'll show you on this next slide. This really, to me, kind of tells a story. It's again, we've got the 4 columns in the same order. We start with our natural gas. We add some solar. We go to full electrification with the same solar, and then some additional solar on there. And you can see left to right, the life cycle cost does go up a little bit. But to me, the story here is really, if we start on the left, these first 3 bars, the blue, the red, and the green, those are upfront costs. So the blue is a gas distribution service, the red is the electrical service, and the green is the HVAC equipment cost. The orange is the total 20-year life cycle cost of the energy. We move over to the next column. We've got those same 3 bars on the bottom, the red, blue, and green, and we're adding on top of that, we add the cost of the photovoltaics. That's the purple, and then the blue, the light blue there, that's the 20-year maintenance cost on the photovoltaics. There is some cost associated with that. And then you can see the orange, that's now our 20-year energy costs. So adding the solar, a little bit more life cycle cost, but it's really whether you're spending this upfront or in energy costs, basically, through the 20 years. Same story as we move over to full electrification, to the full electrification and to the full electrification with additional solar on there. It's very, very similar. It's very similar stories. Okay, so actually I'm going to back up here. Todd, in a minute, Todd's going to talk about some of the our lead analysis and kind of the process with attaining lead gold. That analysis is based off of the second to the left column, where we've got some natural gas in the facility and solar on the roof as well. Okay, we took a look at adding battery storage, which right now is not in the design. Not that it couldn't be added, but I just wanted to highlight some points on this for you. If we are to achieve net zero operation, you can't do that with natural gas in the facility. It has to be fully electrified, right? So this battery storage kind of complements that. If we go full electrification and have some battery storage, it allows us. It could kind of like I said, it could help towards the net zero goals, or it could kind of also take the place of a generator. Now, the difference between the battery storage and like a natural gas generator, obviously natural gas generator uses natural gas, but this battery storage, provides maybe a 6-hour backup supply of energy, whereas a natural gas generator, you can basically keep that going indefinitely in theory. As far as cost, the material cost only of one of these systems is about $250,000, or a comparably sized generator or a generator size for this facility, the total install cost would be about $60,000. So in addition to acting as a standby generator, it would also, be able to store power when the sun's out, and then, discharge that power when the sun's not out, and that would save an additional $4,000 to $5,000 annually of energy costs. We've got here, this would be installed outside. It avoids complications associated with indoor installation. And also it has a shorter life expectancy than generator, in the 15-year range, something like that. Some of the highlights, as I said, net zero operation can't be achieved while using natural gas heat. We have to, go fully electrified. Our estimated potential photovoltaic output is in the 174 to 186 kilowatts and 235 megawatt hours per year. I mentioned all options use a fully efficient, fully electrified system in the office area. And I think we've basically covered this. So I'll turn it over to Todd to talk about.
Maybe hit on that last point about the ventilation gravel.
Okay. In the garage area, these garages have very high ventilation requirements, and as far as sizing the equipment, you have to have the equipment size pretty large, and that has an associated really large size of heat in it. So you'd have, at full capacity, large electrical demand. So that's basically what that's saying is, that high ventilation rate drives up the size of the electrical service or the natural gas heat exchanger. In operation, we get around that a little bit by using demand controlled ventilation. So we will operate the system at a base rate of ventilation, which is pretty low. It's a code prescribed value. And then if the vehicle exhaust capture systems turn on, or if we detect that there are some hazardous gases in the facility, it ramps the ventilation rate way up.
So where that puts us with a scorecard is conservatively, we're tracking at 60 yes and 17 maybe points. So threshold for gold is 60 points. And with where we are in design development, we're still early in design development, kind of working our way midstream. We've been really conservative with some of the material choices and some of the credits where we, because of the type of facility it is, it's a little more Spartan for materials and processes. So we want to be safe with what we think we can achieve. This does include the 3 points that Mike mentioned for renewable energy production. And one other thing I want to draw your attention to in red, the density and transportation credits related to site offer a really big point total. That's 10 potential points. But with this site being a county site that we were sort of given in Woodfin, you don't really have the opportunity to take advantage of those 10 points. And so what we've proposed to avoid chasing credits to make up the difference is we applied the percentage of projects that normally achieve that credit and prorated that against our total here. So we're counting 2.6 and 2.4 in the yes column, just so we're not having to sort of work from behind and make up those points because you were using a county site, a county-owned site. And then the last page, our last slide here, our strategy for documenting our process and sort of our compliance with the resolution is we're going to produce an end-of-project report that will go credit by credit, outlining the credit intent, the point totals, and the strategies that we use to achieve that credit. I think that's it, Scott.
Good afternoon. I'm Scott Metcalf with General Services. In closing, what we would like is just some guidance on the life cycle cost analysis and which option to move forward with so we could finish our design development documents. We could potentially, if we had some guidance today, put it through on consent for next week or the next.
Could you speak up a bit?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
What we would like to do is put it on consent after input today for the next meeting.
All right, is that the end of the presentation?
Yes, sir.
Great. All right, thank you, gentlemen, for the information. I have a couple questions. One is like on the question about whether you use the solar array and add storage or not. I mean, it seems like to me, if it's possible from a planning standpoint and a construction standpoint, the ideal would be to kind of look at both options, right? So let's plan a project. We've got a solar array, that we're highly confident we would do, unless the costs just end up being, way higher than forecasted, which I think is unlikely. I bet they'll be lower than that, is my hunch. But and then the storage, I mean, could that be, I guess the question is, when do you need to make that decision? Could we say we definitely we want to do a project, we want to do solar on it. If the storage costs come in, once you do bids, because the solar companies could bid it with solar or solar plus storage, right? If those costs come in and we have real numbers to look at there, then we could kind of make a final decision on that. Or does a decision on whether to potentially include the storage need to be made sort of sooner in the process? Because or is that just ultimately a question of, for a facility like this, you need some kind of backup. You can do a gas backup system, or you could do some solar backup as part of that. So what's the timing around when that decision needs to be made?
As far as the battery storage, that could come at a later date. For design development, we do need some information relatively soon for the mechanical systems so we can proceed forward.
But that's basically the question about full electrification, or is that just about the backup systems, or is that about other mechanical equipment too that would be a part of the design for the system?
Whether we go full electrification or include natural gas, that's the biggest hurdle we have to go through right now.
Let me ask this, so for a facility like this, or for fleet maintenance, I guess one other question would be, like, is this considered a facility that's like, the county operates a lot of buildings where I would assume, I'm kind of speculating here, but I would assume that we don't have generators or backup systems, right? For some we do, that is very important to maintain operational functionality all the time, but for others, it's just inconvenient if the power goes out, occasionally once or twice a year. What's the thinking around like a facility like this, where it's not exactly like a health building or the sheriff's department where, it has to be functioning all the time? This is where we maintain our vehicles. How important is that for a facility such as this?
It would be important because we do service all the police department vehicles there, as well as emergency services vehicles.
Okay. So you would want to have you'd have a generator if you didn't do something else.
Yeah.
Just to make sure you could keep working on your projects there. Okay.
Question before us is, which of the scenarios on the 20-year life cycle we're leaning towards?
I do have one other question too, which is that, so if we do a solar array on this building, it's going to be a net metered system, right? So the power generated will be used in the building. If there's some excess power, you can deliver it to the grid or put it in the batteries for being used when it's needed. In terms of the different sizes of the systems, so Duke Energy, does have some rules around how big of a system you can install to be approved under the net metering agreement. So I guess I'm just curious if we're confident Duke would allow the county to build the size systems that are described in these scenarios, or might they say, because it's related to the peak energy use of a building, might they say, well, we think the peak's going to be a little bit lower here, so we actually won't let you build a system quite this size. Any initial thoughts on that, or has that been looked at?
That has not been looked at, no, so we'd have to look into that.
Yeah. I mean, I personally would lean towards building the array that's, the size arrays are pretty close together. I would say, if you're going to go out there and mobilize and build a project, build the biggest one that you can. I think Duke might limit it a little bit lower than what's contemplated here, just under their rules. So, anyway, that's just an observation. That it may not be totally possible to know exactly what size system Duke would ultimately allow out there. It's probably in this neighborhood, though, right?
That's something that we would confirm for you for sure during the design development phase.
Okay. I guess, my thoughts on this is that in the long run, like we're gonna, to meet our renewable energy goals and to meet the climate issues we're facing, the single biggest need, like the single biggest cause of this whole problem is generating our power from sources that generate a lot of carbon emissions, right? So switching those out for sources that primarily generate power through renewable energy that doesn't have any of those pollution sources, that's the single biggest need. So to me, the most valuable part of this whole project is putting a really great solar array on it to meet, whether it's 100% or 90% or whatever, the vast majority of the needs would be generated on site. So to me, that's the thing I would advocate for the most strongly is let's make sure we have a good solar array on there. In the long run, we're going to need to have a lot of battery storage too to meet our renewable energy goals, because the sun doesn't shine all the time. And so these battery storage is coming out as a technology so that you can, store the power and then use it when you need it. But I don't see that as urgent of a need in the near term compared to switching out fossil fuel generation for renewable generation. So my orientation would be to commit to doing the best solar array we can. I would love it if we can get bids on both solar and storage to look at that. This is still a pretty dynamic area in the industry. like the cost of both solar and storage mostly going down, but with the way the economy is working right now, some things are going up again. So it's, exactly when this gets bid, I don't think we know for sure exactly where those will come in. My hope is that they would come in more favorable than what's budgeted here, but we can't know that. So that's my lean. Commit to solar. If we can keep the option of looking at storage on the table, I'd love to do that. Other questions or thoughts from commissioners?
And so just to clarify, you're leaning toward the solar with the full electrification. So one of those out of the 4 scenarios they gave us,
Could you just talk about that just a little bit more? I guess I'm a little unclear on, is the full electrification needed just for the backup system? Or is there a scenario of we're going electric for the day-to-day operations of the building, but when we think about just having a backup system, there's a question about whether you want to do solar for that or just have a gas generator, but that you would only turn on very infrequently when the grid goes down. So but is this, I guess I'm still not clear if we're talking just about the backup system or some other day-to-day operations of the facility that would be gas versus electric.
It's the actual day-to-day operations of the facility. So it's the heat for the storage area and the heat for the building maintenance bay.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, I mean, if I kind of elaborate on that, I think it kind of shows the value of the life cycle cost analysis too. I talked about the ventilation rates or potential ventilation rates in the garage area and how that increases the size of the electric resistance heat or the natural gas heat. And when we did the life cycle cost analysis, those ended up actually being a little closer than we thought that they would be. So initially we started off with natural gas thinking, oh, it's going to be super expensive to heat this place with the electric resistance heat. And we go through the life cycle cost analysis and we saw, yeah, it's more expensive, but it's not quite what we thought it would be.
I mean, the life cycle costs are so close, I would lean towards full electrification, but I'd honestly, I would sort of want to sit with these numbers a bit more before I would like want to vote on something, which I know we're not voting on it today, so I'd like to take a little more time with that myself. But Jeremiah, do you have some comments on this too?
Sorry, go ahead, Commissioner.
Well, yeah, I just think from a process perspective, maybe not moving to consent agenda as a next step and having a chance to kind of come back and just digest a little bit more and have that discussion as a prelude to vote maybe. I'm very excited about this, but yeah, my mic's off. I'm sorry, I'm muted. It happens on Zoom, it happens in real life. Just the request would be that instead of moving to the consent agenda as a next step, we actually just have it as a discussion item and can talk through the numbers in that context and have it be a bit more interactive. Oh, you almost got it in there.
Try.
Yeah, I would just say that from the perspective of the Sustainability Office, I think this is exactly the kind of thing we were hoping to see in a life cycle cost analysis. That bar chart was pretty telling in my view, because you had this option. Most of them were relatively similar in total overall cost, but you can choose to spend the bulk of your time or your bulk of your money paying for the power for the building, or having the upfront costs sort of cover that for you over the life cycle of the system and covering most of that with renewables, right? Which is, I think, going to get us a lot closer to meeting the types of goals that we're hoping to meet, especially when it comes to new construction. Because every time we add something to our building portfolio, we're inching our way further away from being able to meet those goals if we don't build it in this responsible way up front. So I think, Chairman Newman, your point is right. I think that, we're happy to have some initial, some more discussion about this at a follow-up meeting. But I thought that particular graph was very telling. And from my perspective, obviously being fairly biased, I'm very supportive of the full electrification, because moving away from fossil fuels is exactly what we're trying to accomplish.
It's just one thing I'm still a little unclear on, like for the scenario where you still have some natural gas or you do full electrification, the solar array size though, which again might be adjusted once we deal with Duke, but it's the same size system.
There's a moderate increase from, I think it's scenario 3 to scenario 4, only a few KW.
Yeah, so if you're saying in the 4 options,
And like with option 3, full electrification, 142 kW solar array, what percentage of the electrical demands is the solar providing estimated there?
I can tell you the percentage when it had natural gas with the same size solar array was in the 90% range. So what's the percentage when we add the full electrification? I'm not sure, maybe 80%, something like that. Kind of speaking off the cuff, but that's. So again, we kind of, in some ways, backed into some of these options. We started off, our big focus was natural gas or full electrification. And a lot of that was, like I said, based off of, well, we need really large electric heaters for the garage bay. And doing the life cycle cost analysis, we saw, well, in the actual operation of the facility, we're not actually using that much natural gas or full electric resistance heat. So it was kind of like we were comparing those 2 options, and we said, well, okay, well, if we add this extra electric, it didn't turn out to be that much. How much additional solar would we need? And we backed into some of these because it just kind of made sense, honestly.
Cool. Hey, so I love seeing the life cycle costs. Would it also be possible to circulate like the upfront construction cost differences too, so we could just look at the project that way too?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Which we don't. I was going to say, I mean, if you've got it here, that's great, or you could just circulate it so we because there's some difference in terms of the capital costs for the different scenarios too, right?
yeah. So as part of this, in terms of the parts that are variable, the upfront costs, the construction costs are included in this here. It's, we didn't take the entire facility and, isolate that out, but we could very easily from this take, okay, here's what the upfront construction costs are, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. All right.
So just to clarify, if I'm understanding what we're seeing here in the 20-year life cycle cost, you have all the costs totaled into that over that 20 years. So this includes all cost.
So this is not all costs of the whole facility. These are all of the costs that would vary. So these are the HVAC system costs and the solar photovoltaic costs, the cost of getting the service to the facility, either it's natural gas or electric. We do not include, site costs, wall costs, or, not costs that aren't associated with the decision. We didn't include those, yeah.
Right, okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, those costs are all static, essentially. Those are included no matter what. This is the decision point, essentially. How do we heat it? How do we cool it? That's really the decision point at which, we wanted some input from the board.
Guys, any other questions right now? Thanks for all the information. Great presentation. Just one other comment I would have is that I think the solar array will last a lot longer than 20 years, right? So I think that's a very conservative assumption. I mean, because most of the equipment will be, definitely for the panels, will probably be even warranted for a lot longer than that, and would also have a functional life a lot longer than that. So not arguing with it, but just pointing out there's probably a lot of additional value out there over the life cycle of the building that's probably not recognized in the financials of this.
So to be clear on next steps, you want us to bring this forward on the next meeting for you to give us guidance on which one to put into the design so we can then send out for bid.
Yes, I think that's right. And just to clarify, in terms of what's practical from a planning standpoint, we could, like if we said we want full electrification option for the day-to-day operations of the facility, but we're still going to hold off on making a decision about what kind of backup system we're going to have. Those would be options that it would be feasible to kind of keep both of those on the table. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate the information. Look forward to talking further. All right. Commissioners, next up is the Tmip project review, and Tim Love's here.
Good afternoon. Today we wanted to talk a little bit about the Tourism Product Development Fund, also sometimes referred to as the Tmip, Tourism Management and Investment Plan. A lot of acronyms today. And so what I'd like to do is set the stage just a little bit, talk about some of the foundational pieces related to the Product Development Fund. From there, we've got some project ideas we wanted to share with you, but ultimately open it up to commission today to have kind of an informal discussion about some of your priorities moving forward. So moving to our overview slide, I know y'all know much of this, but just so we kind of establish a baseline. So the Tourism Product Development Fund is the TPDF. It's a Tourism Development Authority, TDA, grant program. The TPDF projects are funded by the Hotel Occupancy Tax. These projects are evaluated and selected by the TPDF committee, which is a 9-person committee. Over the life of the TPDF, 39 community projects have been funded. Approximately $44 million has been allocated towards those projects. This does not include the $5 million that was allocated during the pandemic related to the Jobs Investment and Recovery grant program. Buncombe County has been the direct recipient of a number of these awards, most notably the Unca Recreation Destination and the Woodfin Blueway and Wave. And then finally, the reason why we're talking about this, the TPDF application cycle is approaching, and the TDA has specifically requested that county staff bring some ideas for discussion with the TDA to see if there's some partnership opportunities. So that's our context. The upcoming TPDF cycle, I won't get into the weeds on this. There are 2 dates that are highlighted, and those are the important ones, I think. Phase 1 applications are due June 1st, and then Phase 2 applications are due at the end of August. Phase 1's a simple application. If things go well with those applications, those projects are invited back for Phase 2. So that's how that works. There's some additional details that are included on this slide as well. So opening up the conversation with Commission, we've shared with you just some projects that had been pulled together by staff. The thought process on this, county staff had worked with municipal staff over the past few years to understand some of their ideas. So municipal staff meaning, the town of Black Mountain, town of Woodfin, et cetera, to come up with some ideas. Additionally, our community partners have approached us with some ideas. And so we've pulled those together in a couple quick slides. And this first slide refers to projects that, Buncombe County would sort of be the direct recipient, so receiving of the funds, as opposed to the next slide, which is more about projects that might go to a different municipality or a different entity, but that it's still been brought to our attention, and so we wanted to share with Commission. So the way to read the slide, we've got a project name, a description, an estimated total cost. This is very high level. I don't have vendor invoices behind this at this point. But then we've also got a priority column on the far right. And so that's where we'd kind of want to hear some input today from Commission. And in terms of priority, it could be a high, medium, and low. We don't have to rank all of them, but just want to get a general sense from Commission if there's any projects you'd like to focus on. I would also say that, the mere discussion of these projects is certainly not, an endorsement by Commission. We're just bringing a number of ideas before you and wanted to hear your thoughts. So if helpful, what I'll do is I'll just quickly walk through them very high level, and then I'll open it up to y'all to discuss. So at the top of the project list, we have affordable housing development. And so what we're proposing here is some type of recurring allocation of TDA funds to support the development of affordable housing in Buncombe County. And so this affordable housing, would be for those that are likely to be employed in the service, hospitality, or other industry related, but, trying to meet a major community need. This is, of course, a new idea. It's been discussed, but I think needs some further fleshing out, but it's certainly been discussed with the TDA and we think is a possibility. The next item refers to sort of Phase 2 of the sports park recreation destination. You've already seen us and you've funded turf and lights at the Buncombe County Sports Park, those 3 fields. We would propose doing another, potentially 3 fields. to continue to grow our ability to have more playable hours here in Buncombe County. Our next item would be the Ferry Road destination, and specifically thinking about greenways, trails, publicly accessible recreation on that site. We've of course talked about this related to Ferry Road, but this would be moving forward on the recreation components. The Woodfin Greenway and Blueway, you've heard a ton about this project. There's an upcoming ribbon cutting for Silverline Park, which is pretty exciting. That'll be this week. But this would refer to rounding out the remainder of those assets in Woodfin, which includes the Riverside Drive Park, but also the Woodfin and Beaver Dam Creek Greenways. And then finally, the Farm Heritage Trail Phase 2. And so our Farm Heritage Trail has been successful and a really great asset, and we've been thinking for a long time, Ariel, about expanding that into a Phase 2 in sort of the southeast of the county. So that's our initial projects. These were more sort of, I would say, Buncombe County led, if you will. You could see us playing a key role in those. The next few projects would not necessarily be Buncombe County led, but have been brought to our attention, so we wanted to share them with you. The first relates to McCormick Field, and so as you know, McCormick Field is city owned. It's the home of the Asheville Taurus, really great community asset. There's a number of deferred maintenance, but also sports-related requests by Major League Baseball that have come to the forefront and have been talked about in the news. Next on the list is the UNCA track. That track is long overdue for an overhaul, and we've certainly had conversations with the UNCA athletic department about that. The UNC track, as a note, is open to the community. It's not just for sporting events. Lots of folks walk on it. I-26 aesthetics. We know that the widening project is ongoing and will be with us for some time. There are a number of aesthetic improvements to sort of, make the infrastructure sort of more appealing and sort of fit in better with our environment. That's what that refers to. And then we have a handful of site plans that we worked on during the original Tmip project, which was almost 3 years ago now, with the towns of Black Mountain, Weaverville, Montreat. And then Swannanoa, of course, is not a town. It's just a place that we recognize as a place. And so I won't jump into the details of any of those, but those municipalities have lots of ideas about how they can improve their communities through the addition of bike parks, greenways, you name it. So I'll back up and hopefully stop talking at this point, but wanted to get a sense from y'all if there are any items that, jump out to you as areas you'd want to focus on, maybe put ahead of other items. Ultimately, the TDA is looking for us to kind of prioritize what's most important, but also what's most timely. So if there are items we want to see in year 1 versus year 5 or year 10, that's the kind of framework to think through.
Okay, Tim, great, thanks. And so, we could have some discussion here, commissioners, and but I was also thinking, and I'm sorry, maybe we should have huddled about this, the mechanics of how to do this weighing in process a little bit more, because these are all, many of these are pretty significant projects. Some of them are important, even if the budget's not as big for them. But I think it would be helpful, as Tim's saying, for us to kind of, really identify what are the top priorities here, what are other things that would be, medium priorities, and not that we wouldn't love to see any of these different things happen, but, are there some of these that simply, frankly, fall below the others in terms of level of prioritization, especially in terms of what might happen over the next, 1 to 5 years, so to speak. So we could have some discussion, and I was thinking, sometimes when we've had issues like this before, I don't think anybody wants to just raise their hand and say, like, I hate that project, right? But, if we had a process whereby we could, kind of rank these together as a group, then I think some of the things that are most important would start to really stand out. So I was thinking that might be a process we go through, which, maybe we would just need to kind of write down on paper, like, here's the projects and kind of rank them, here's my number 1, here's my number 2, number 3. If we had everybody do that, we'd start seeing, which of these are coming out really high. And if some of them are lower, then we'd see that too. So Does that sound like a process that commissioners like, or what would be a good way to get, kind of, get at this?
I have a quick clarifying question that I think will help me answer your question is, do we have any sense of sort of what the ideal number of projects to move forward with is? Like, is it a better strategy to consolidate around 2 projects? No, it sounds like it's, so yeah, walk us through sort of what your thinking is on what the sweet spot would be both for, I think that my 2 questions would be sort of the number of projects we advance and then the total amount of funding that would represent both on a 1-year basis, but then obviously with, if affordable housing is included on an ongoing basis.
Sure. I'm glad to try to muddle through this, but our project list will be limited based on funding. And currently, I believe we're at $12 million roughly in product development funds that are available for allocation, and anticipating being at, I think, 15 million before the end of the fiscal year. And, that the product development fund refills, I think at roughly a $2 million a month amount. Don't quote me on that at the moment. And so I do think there's some limitations. I know the TDA is very interested in partnership on some big project ideas. Their preference would be to move the needle on a few projects rather than just sort of smaller projects. So I'm not sure that helps, but I think that is kind of the direction they would want to lean.
And what they've asked us for is exactly right to prioritize. So I would like for you to go 1 through 10, if that's how many we have. And then if they can fund the first 2 or the first 3, but I don't want to just go with 1 project. I'd like to have the list of projects.
And there are a lot of resources flowing through this fund. I mean, I think we all support changing it so that there's even more community kind of infrastructure investment and priorities. And hopefully that will happen through proposed changes to the legislation. But even with the legislation as it stands now, there's, maybe $9 to $11 million annually that are going to go to these community type projects. So there's definitely room to do multiples of these projects over the next few years. So.
Yeah. I'd also add that there is a matching component related to any, TPDF grants. And so generally it's a 1-to-1. So, if the TDA were to put in $1 million, you'd expect $1 million to come from, either the county or the county and partners. So there is that element as well. So
I guess I have a couple more questions then, if that's okay. For the $2 million annually for affordable housing, could we go higher?
we absolutely could.
I'd be interested in exploring that. And then I think my other question is, not right now, but as we move forward and before we sort of bring forth our final recommendations, understanding what matching funds could look like on each project and how much actual, I'd like to get our head around sort of how much actual county general fund dollars we'd be investing or secured grant funding we know we'd be investing. And also sort of think about it that way as well.
Easy answer to the affordable housing question is we currently put 2 million or so annually in affordable housing. So that's already what we're putting in, if that makes sense.
Or 40 million. I'm just kidding, the bond. Yeah.
The bonds would not be.
No, I know, I'm joking,
Okay.
yes.
And there's other matching sources out there too.
Correct.
In that space for sure.
Yeah, great, thank you.
And I do think an iterative discussion would be helpful, getting a sense of, commission's general priorities and bringing those to the table with other key players, obviously, the city of Asheville, TDA. I think that's the key, understanding where that alignment is between those major entities.
Commissioner Wells, do you have some thoughts?
Well, so are you just you want us to go ahead and share some thoughts? Are you wanting us to go ahead and start ranking? I'm trying to.
Why don't we share any thoughts that anyone would like to kind of put on the table, and then maybe we'll rank them.
Okay.
So make your case.
Well, I'm very excited to see affordable housing up there for these funds. So I think it's great that they're taking that into consideration, and there's the potential with that. I think it will meet a real community need. So that is wonderful. So I strongly support that. I definitely think that putting, you know, there's some projects that they've already been partnering with us on, and I think I'd like to see those, you know, come to completion. The Woodfin and the recreation destination, both of those, it'd be nice to get those wrapped up and completed. Ferry Road, clearly I'm supportive of. I'll make the case for the Farm Heritage Trail too, because I know more about that one probably than the rest of you, so I'll speak to that. So our farming community have been asking for this for years because we did the northwest portion over there, and ever since that was done, farmers in the rest of the county have been saying, why not us? And this is definitely is a economic opportunity for the farms. It helps generate more folks coming out there and providing income. So I did want to make a plug for that not being left off as well.
Are there some projects on here that if we did partner with others, that would bring them closer to completion so that we can think about them maybe from that broader picture of where to get the most value for the funds?
That's a great question, Commissioner. I think one that immediately comes to mind would be the Woodfin Greenway and Blue Way. As it is a recreation destination, which appeals to community, but also the tourism industry. And so I think that's a good fit. And there's also a need for additional funding there. Similarly, it wouldn't bring it to conclusion, but I think the affordable housing project, you can see clearly that there would be some alignment with other entities on that. But those are just two that jump out immediately.
Al or Robert, do you have any initial thoughts?
Well, with being on the TDA board, understand they are a lot of money, but only a portion of it could be used for what we're doing here. And I think you said 9 to 11. I think it's somewhere around 11 to 15 million that is available right now. But I'm interested. I mean, one thing that we have talked about is affordable housing, and I think that'd give us the most support. But as far as, I think in the next 30 minutes of putting these in a category from top to bottom, I just don't think I could. After one or two, I couldn't do anything with it. I'd have to have more time and just working with Tim of knowing if we can set up some 3-on-3s for other information be, you know, out for a 30-minute session here where I can understand more about it. So I think we're all right there with the affordable housing, though, I would think. But other than that, I don't want to get in no deeper.
Appreciate that. Mr. Whitesides, any thoughts?
You know, when I look at a lot of them, they do it. You know, affordable housing, that would fit right in because one group that would, I see us, that would benefit from this would be the workers at the hotels. Because a lot of them cannot afford to live, you know, and not only in Asheville, but in Buncombe County, they drive in. So that's why I would think coming from that fund, it would be strong. And I see a lot of the others I could support. One, though, I question is McCormick Field. And the reason I question that, you know, I see these billionaires who own all these major league teams, and they just continue to push down to the municipalities and the cities for money to help them get richer. You know, let's let them take care of it. You know, that would be one that would be hard for me to support. But the rest, I feel good about. You know, I could go with that.
Commissioner Edwards, do you have any other comments at this time?
I'm really excited to see affordable housing on here. I think that probably comes as no surprise to anyone, but I also appreciate the TDA's willingness to entertain that as an option for us and the recognition of the hospitality industry and the need for more affordable housing. I really, really excited to see this on the list, and it will definitely be in my top rankings. Thanks.
I'll just comment. I'm also excited it's in the mix. And I think if we, if we and they, and at the end of the day, it's the TDA's decision on this, if they decide to be supportive of it, there are a lot of details to work out around, like, well, exactly how would that work? Because I think that both, legally, and that's probably the most important part, is that legally the funds would have to be invested in a way that are directly supporting the housing for the tourism industry workforce, right? I think that's how they can legally justify investing those funds, because it's got to be to benefit, under the state statutes, the tourism industry, but obviously the workforce is essential to that. So that's how they make that case. So I think in the programs that we work on, though, we already see that like a very high percentage of the people that benefit from the affordable housing programs are people who work in the service sector and tourism sector. So we'll just need to work with them to figure out how to document that and to show that the projects they're supporting are directly contributing towards those additional units that folks in their workforce are part of. So anyway, I'm very supportive of that, and I think the timing is great. I mean, we've got these goals. We know we can't do it alone, and having them join the city and Dogwood and the county as another partner would just help continue towards building this momentum that I think we're seeing. I'll just say, when I rank these, it's not just because they're the county-sponsored projects, but I would say, just as an elected official, if there were other projects that the county wasn't necessarily leading on, but which I felt like were top priorities, I would vote for them. But I do see those county projects that, for me, are ones that really do feel like really high priorities. Of course, affordable housing, but then the Woodfin project we've been working on that as a community for years, and it feels like we're really close. We just need to push that across the finish line. So that's very high for me. The Ferry Road property, I think, of course, we all believe it's a great opportunity, right? But it needs some infrastructure investment. But it's going to be it's going to be a great park, greenways, French Broad River. So that ranks really high too. And the other two county-led projects, I think, are also really, really strong as well. So when I rank them, it is going to be those county ones that I rank the highest, but not just because they're the county, but I just think that they're really high community priorities. So, Avril?
Are there any projects missing? As Tim opened up by saying, these are projects that we put on the table, so I'm not sure if there's any from the commission standpoint that's missing as well. As we sit down to talk to TDA, we don't want it to just be what we think, but we want to make sure we're carrying forward your priorities. So if there's any missing, please let us know that.
I think those represented what I've been hearing about. But if I think of something else, I'll let you know.
Yeah. I think within the constraints of the existing legislation, I think this is a really good list to focus on. So we've got about a little over 15 minutes. I do want to mention briefly some information about the Ferry Road, but I mean, do we have a way we could kind of do a ranking of these projects real quickly? Do we need to just kind of have everyone write down, hey, here's my top 5 or my top 10 in order of my most important down to in order after that? Is that would be helpful, Avril?
That would be helpful as we meet with TDA. Or I was thinking the way y'all do your rankings for committee members, where you pick your top 1 or 2 and we all count them out. We could do it that way, but
yeah,
however you do it, we would be happy to take your input.
And when's the upcoming meeting again?
Monday, right?
That's on Monday.
Yeah.
I mean, another option, if you want a little time to think about it, is we could email that information in. And the other thing I would say too, Robert, to address your concern, because this is important, I don't want people to feel rushed. We could do an initial round of input, but the application deadlines are still a couple months away. So we could do here's some initial input, but we could basically say, we plan to do this again, and maybe in a more formal way in maybe 30 days from now. So we don't have to feel like this is the final decision on it. But why don't we all plan on just sending an email to Avril by the end of this week, kind of listing do you want top 5? Why don't we do our top 5? Is that good? Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
All right, we'll do that, and that'll be our initial input on it. But we'll revisit this in maybe 30 days from now, and before we apply. Yep. All right, commissioners, great. Thank you all so much for your time on this. Thanks, Tim. All right, we do have a few more minutes. I did want to just check in on a topic that'll be on our agenda for the regular meeting tonight, which is a discussion about the Ferry Road property. So at that, on that agenda item, staff are also looking for us to give some guidance around the future planning for that property. And we've talked about this at several meetings, and as y'all know, the Equinox team and their folks have kind of painted several scenarios for potential future development of the property. So, and we've kind of gone around and kind of talked about which scenarios stand out the best to us. And so what I wanted to do was kind of take a stab at summarizing what I'm hearing as kind of like the main elements that sound important to the commission. And in some of these, like, you know, if I had to kind of pick, I'd say like I'm kind of a blend of like scenario B and C. So, and others may be in slightly different places. But I wanted to just read this out and see if this sounds like an approach that resonates with the commissioners. And there are a couple of points in particular that like are maybe a little bit more specific. Some of these I mean, my feeling is like in some ways we should keep this pretty broad because we're bringing in some great land use consultants who are going to be able to help flesh this out and bring some real business acumen to this process. So I don't want us to get so specific that we limit what they're able to do. So some of this is fairly broad, and in a couple other areas, I thought giving a little more specific direction might be helpful. So let me just read this out. All right, the commission supports a future land use at the Ferry Road property that includes the following goals and elements. So the staff report that we'll be looking at this evening, it recommends a range of preservation of the property between 36% to 60% of the 137 acres. So those would be preserved as natural areas, outdoor recreation space, and buffers. So, and this is what I would kind of put forward for the commission to consider. So the commissioners would support the goal of preservation on the upper range of that amount. So for example, in the 55 to 66% range, which would assure that we preserve at least 75 to 82 acres of the 137 acres. And the commission also specifically supports preservation of the existing mature forest land to serve as a buffer for any of the future development on the property for neighboring property owners. As we all know, it's like all, you know, there's mature forest out there, so we wouldn't have to necessarily add landscaping, but could preserve some of the natural buffer. All right, next bullet point. So therefore, if we did that, the development footprint on the property would be limited to 40 to 45% of the property if we preserve the 55 to 60%. So that'd be 54 to 61 acres. Within the development footprint, the commission supports, and a lot of this is just lifted, frankly, right out of the affordable housing and workforce housing goals that we approved recently. But within the development footprint, the commission supports a phased development approach that would make a significant contribution to meeting the county's recently approved affordable and workforce housing goals with a diversity of housing types, including multifamily, missing middle, and single-family homes. The commissioners support a mix of rental and home ownership opportunities and analysis of whether the site might be viable for inclusion of a 4% affordable tax credit project, which would leverage additional significant resources to the project. Next bullet point, support for inclusion of some commercial elements if financially viable and harmonious with the overall project design, such as live workspaces, light manufacturing, outdoor recreation-oriented businesses, childcare facilities, and neighborhood-oriented businesses. And then the last bullet point is in order to help meet these goals, at least 2/3 of the new construction units should be priced at affordable and workforce price points. Provisions should be included to assure long-term affordability. And the commission is open to inclusion of some market rate units as well to help finance the infrastructure improvements that are needed for the future of the property. So, all right, so that's was sort of my stab at not necessarily picking exactly what I would do if it was just up to me, but I was trying to kind of incorporate ideas I've been hearing and feedback from the commission as we've gone through this process. So, and I thought going into a little bit more detail like this might be more helpful than just sort of saying, you know, who wants B and who wants C. So, and in some ways, there's maybe some elements of several of the scenarios in here. So if there's any initial questions or feedback, we have a few minutes, we could do that now in preparation for sort of thinking about this further later tonight.
I think that's a really good draft there that incorporates a lot of what I've been hearing. So I appreciate you working on getting with us and putting that together. It will probably save a whole lot of discussion later on too. But one thing I think we'll also need to make sure is the infrastructure. That's one thing I didn't hear addressed in this, and I think we definitely have to make sure that the infrastructure will be addressed, because that's one thing that we've heard from the community. And I'd say that would be clearly the roads, as well as then I would say, and you did touch on the green infrastructure, the buffer, all of that's really important. So thanks for making sure. That was one thing we heard from the community.
So support inclusion of the infrastructure the property needs and the neighborhood needs. That includes an access road to the property so that folks aren't using just the existing road system that's in there. I think that's a great point. Other infrastructure that you think we ought to specifically mention in terms of planning for the property?
The roads was the one that I most thought of. I mean, we're going to have to deal with sewer and water, but I think we clearly know that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And Terry, infrastructure that doesn't impact coming through the neighborhood, I think was really what the point was, correct?
So access roads
The
specifically to
access
avoid
roads.
putting
Yes.
an undue traffic burden on the existing
Yes, thank you.
road, right?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Any other initial feedback?
Stop. And the last piece of infrastructure was around stormwater.
Stormwater management. All right. All right, Commissioners, thanks for letting us spend just a moment on that to preview that for our next meeting. So I think we're good, and we've got about 10 minutes before we start our regular meeting at 5 o'clock. So this meeting's adjourned.